Iowa, Ashley has served her home state in various capacities over the years. She grew up in Des Moines, and after receiving her BA in broadcast journalism from the University of Southern California, she moved to Cedar Rapids area to work and raise her family. She currently lives in Marion with her husband, Matt, and her two sons, Max and Jax. For nearly a decade, Ashley was an on-air reporter for KCRG TV in Cedar Rapids. She traveled throughout the state to cover issues that matter to Iowans and to tell their stories on air. During her time as a reporter, she won multiple accolades, including 2 Midwest Regional Emmy Awards and recognition as both RTDNA Health Reporting Fellow and Waypoint Tribute to Women honoree. Her reporting career inspired her to serve Iowans in a different way by running for a seat in the Iowa State House. In 2017, she became the first woman to represent Iowa's 67th district, which includes Hiawatha, Robbins, Cedar Rapids, and Marion. During her tenure, she was a fierce advocate for taxpayers, helping to cut taxes and rein in irresponsible spending. She also championed workforce development and rural broadband initiatives and helped make child care more accessible to working parents across Iowa. Ashley is deeply involved in her community. She belongs to the Antioch Christian Church and is a member of the March of Dimes, Young Parents Network, and National Council on Youth Leadership. Ashley now represents Iowa's 1st district in Congress and fights each day for families, businesses, and farmers. Let's give a warm welcome to Congresswoman Ashley Hinson.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for getting up early and coming out and spending a little time with us this morning. A pleasure to be with you and a true honor to serve you all in Congress. First, I want to begin with a few introductions. Some people in the audience I want to recognize. I know State Senator Dawn Driscoll is in the room. Dawn, where are you? Back there. She represents this district in the Iowa legislature, and then Representative Tom Gerhold is here as well. So give them a round of applause. They're also serving you. Just wrapped up a very busy legislative session, so thank you both for your service to the district as well. I ran for Congress in the first place because I felt it was very important to fight against the chaos and dysfunction we were seeing in Washington, D.C. And now that I've been there about 5 months, I can assure you it does exist, and it's probably worse than I thought it was going to be. But I think it's really, really important, the work we're doing in Congress, to stand up for taxpayers. For me, it was really a priority to make sure that we were standing up for safety and security in our communities, fighting for rural American priorities. If there's one thing as a small state, which we are, we only have 4 members of Congress, that I consistently am aware of, it's that rural states' voices can sometimes get lost. So that's something that the entire Iowa delegation has been working together on to make sure that we are amplifying your voices on the issues you care about. And I do think fighting for taxpayers is our #1 job. That's your money. That's not the government's money. And I think we need to be making sure that we're making the best decisions possible with your tax dollars. The issues facing American families right now are serious. We're coming out of a major pandemic. It's been a challenging year, but I know we can grow, and getting our economy growing again is one of the #1 priorities for me, and I know members of Congress on both sides of the aisle share that perspective. However, I do feel that there is a disconnect a lot of times between the conversations we have in a room here, the conversations you have at your kitchen tables with your families. I see a lot of young people in the audience, students who are truly our next generation. And I think oftentimes the conversations that are happening in Washington, D.C. from people who've never stepped foot in a place like Iowa, there's a disconnect there. And so it's my job to tell your stories and make sure that they are heard in Washington, D.C. I think I've made it very clear I'm willing to work with anyone to get things done for this district. That was what I ran on, and that's what I'm delivering on. I've introduced more than 100 pieces of legislation. Dozens of those are bipartisan bills, and I think they reflect the values of Iowa: hard work, opportunity, and freedom. And that's been my perspective on what I've tried to work on in Congress. I will never be afraid, however, to push back when the policies are wrong for Iowa, when they're wrong for taxpayers. And that's, I think, what you've seen happen during my first 5 months in Congress. So again, right now my priorities are making sure we have our economic recovery off on the right track so we can have that freedom and opportunity. We have to secure our border. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I had the chance to head down to the border myself and see what was happening in person. So we have to secure our border, and then again, focus on freedom and opportunity. I mentioned that I had introduced or co-sponsored over 100 pieces of legislation, and I wanted to highlight a few that I think are really important to the 1st District. The first of those being the PPP Equity Act. When the PPP program was initially developed last year, it moved pretty fast, provided a lot of resources to our business community so that they could stay open, keep their doors open, they could survive this pandemic. But there were some nuances in there that left people out. And I realized that, and Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger realized that. She's a Democrat from Virginia. Our offices in DC are actually right next to each other in the Longworth building. And so we had a good meeting, and we decided this is something that we needed to fix. So our bill closes a loophole so that people who were unintentionally being left out of those resources can also access them. That's incredibly important for our farmers, our ranchers, and our sole proprietors who their bottom line was hit very hard in the last year. I also introduced the Red Tape Reduction Act. When I looked at what drives up the cost of doing business, what gets in the way of you living your lives, is more regulation. So the Red Tape Reduction Act puts into Code 5 of what I thought President Trump's best anti-regulatory policies were. Specifically, I would point to two that I think are really important. Number one, that there's actually congressional oversight on regulations as they're coming through the pipeline. I'm hearing from you, that's why I'm here today. Transparency is important to me. I need to tell your stories, but if I can't best advocate for you on a regulation, it can go into effect without any real understanding of what the impact is right back here at home. So I think that's really important. And then the other the aspect is we have a lot of regulations on the books. The government loves to regulate things, and so for every one new proposed regulation, we would need to take two of those off the books. So those are two pieces of that legislation that I think are really important. And then standing up for our veterans is absolutely crucial to me. How many, if you're a veteran and you've served, would you please stand up? I'd like to acknowledge your service here today. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service. I know how much of a sacrifice it is to take that leap and serve your country, so thank you very much. It's my job now to be your advocate in Congress, and I wanted to talk about two pieces of legislation that I think do just that. One is a piece of legislation that you saw your entire Iowa delegation lead on, and it's to honor Sergeant Ketchum. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and obviously the wounds of war were great for him. He suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, went to go seek help at the Iowa City VA, and he was turned away. And just hours later, he took his own life. And so our goal is to make sure that doesn't happen to another veteran, that everybody, regardless of where they live, can get those mental health services. So I co-led, I was the lead Republican sponsor, along with Cindy Axney from Iowa's 3rd District, and Marionette Miller-Meeks and Randy Feenstra. All of your Iowa delegation signed on, and we got that bill across the finish line just last week. So very proud of that. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. And then the Office of Government Accountability released some information about sexual harassment happening at the VA to the staff there. It's unacceptable. People should not feel unsafe where they're going to work, and most certainly they shouldn't feel unsafe whistleblowing about something that's bad at work. So our bill, which Senator Ernst and Senator Hassan in the Senate, and then in the House, I've co-led with Congressman Pappas, a Democrat. So this is a bipartisan, bicameral bill, but it actually puts into place some transparency and some accountability for sexual harassment and in the workplace. Again, we want everybody to feel safe where they go to work. And then finally, I mentioned the border. I had a chance to be down at the border at the end of April. And it's truly sad what's happening. We've seen record number of crossings at the border, illegal immigrants crossing our border. It's a safety and security issue, as I mentioned. And this is not a partisan issue. When I was down there, I had the chance to have a roundtable with sheriffs, local law enforcement, Democrats and Republicans, Democrat and Republican mayors. We all sat together and talked about the needs and tried to spotlight what's happening there, because the policies have gone the wrong direction and we do have a crisis at the border. So I introduced the See the Crisis Act, which would require our vice president, who is the border czar, she's been named the person who's supposed to go handle this and come up with policies and solutions, it would require her to go visit the border. You've seen Republican and Democrat members of Congress visit the border. We're shining a light on what's happening there, because every state is a border state, and as you look at the dangerous drugs coming up, they come to states like Iowa. Right up Interstate 35, you've got human smuggling happening. It's There are so many problems at the border we absolutely need to address, and our law enforcement, our Customs and Border Patrol, they're putting their lives on the line every single day to help keep all of us safe. I think it's imperative that we actually fix these problems, stop, catch, and release, make sure Title 42 is permanent, which is, it allows Customs and Border Patrol to basically return single adult men back to Mexico. They're crossing at increased rates. And then we need to secure our border, which in my mind means continuing that construction on the border wall. I think it's absolutely crucial we have a good balance of technology and traditional border enforcement to help keep us all safe. So again, I think when I look at my first 5 months, I've tried to stand up for taxpayers, stand up for the safety of our communities, fight for rural America, amplify your voice. Our offices in the district are all open. We're in the business of customer service. We have 3 offices, Cedar Rapids, Waterloo, and Dubuque, and I have a number of staff in the auditorium today. I would also say if you have any issues with the federal government, we solved a lot of IRS check issues. We've also dealt with passports, visas, you name it, veterans benefits. We've solved a lot of those problems for our constituents in the district. So if you have any of those questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to our staff. If you guys would raise your hands, my staff is in the auditorium. We have some forms that you would need to sign to move forward on a casework investigation and get that casework going, but just make sure you know you can reach out to them. So our team here in Iowa is obviously focused on that casework. Our team in Washington, D.C. is focused on more of the legislative, going through the bills and making sure we're supporting good pieces of legislation and speaking out against legislation that's wrong for Iowa. So those are my opening remarks, and I would just do a couple of housekeeping items before we start taking questions, because that's why we're all here today. I want to hear from you. The first thing I would say is we're going to have some mics going around the room, and my staff will bring them up to you. I'd ask you raise your hand if you have a question, and then I will call on you if you would say your name and where you're from. I think that's important so that everybody can understand who all is in the room, and I want to make sure that we also have the opportunity to follow up with you if you have a question or an issue that needs to be addressed. And then the last thing I would just say is let's all be respectful. Let's have a good conversation. I think right now in our country what we need is more political discourse that's respectful and shows Iowa nice. And so I think we can all do that in the room today. But thank you so much. Again, it's an honor to represent you, and I am happy to take your questions. Right there. Good morning.
Good morning, Ashley. Lance Lillibridge. How you doing?
Hi, Lance. How are you?
Good. So the big elephant in the room right at the moment in Vinton County is this solar farm that's going up. And I'm not sure it's really a federal thing, but there's a lot of federal tax dollars that are being, or would be, pushed into that. And my concern is that there's very productive farm ground here that is being looked at and possibly taken by eminent domain. And these contracts that these companies have put out, they're using that language, and I think that it's maybe pushing some folks into go ahead and signing a lease. And I don't know, I guess I feel like they're kind of being bullied, and I think that's what a lot of other people think. And there's a big environmental problem with this. We already have the best solar production anywhere in the world with our corn and soybeans. There's no way to deny that. With photosynthesis, and we can produce food, fuel, and energy with our crops here. And why would we destroy that with solar panels and have in 20 to 30 years a junkyard of garbage that nobody has a responsibility of cleaning up? These leases take away all rights of the landowner, but there's no trust fund or anything, no money set aside to take care of these pieces of equipment when they're into their life. So I think that's a big problem. I don't know if it's a federal deal, but it would sure be nice to have some kind of, if there's federal money coming into it, then maybe we should have some federal people saying, wait a minute, this isn't how we should be spending our tax dollars.
Well, and thank you for that question, Lance. I think our office will definitely take a look at what federal subsidies are involved for solar panels. I'm not well versed in that, admittedly, but we'll definitely look into that. What I would say is on that specific issue, obviously I'm sure you're engaged with your county supervisors, because I think that's probably a county issue and somewhat a state issue too. But I think if you have any questions, I just encourage you to continue advocating them. Our office will look into it as well. I did see a sign on my way in, so I know people are all fired up about it, but yeah, we'll definitely see what role the federal government has in it, but I understand your concern. I don't like eminent domain either, and I think Iowans have spoken up against it many times, so I think the best bet is to always try the free market approach first.
Also, thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for those bills. So I should say that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Lance. Appreciate it. All right, the next question. We have Bill right in the front.
Federal infrastructure. Andy Warhol, who was famous for painting Campbell soup cans, said art is whatever you can get away with. When I look at that infrastructure bill, it looks like everything everybody wants that they shouldn't be getting away with. Is there any hope that there's going to be something as far as actual roads, bridges, true infrastructure, and not everybody's pet project, post office, or bridge to nowhere?
Well, thank you, Bill. Infrastructure has been an issue I've heard a lot about. I'm sure you guys are hearing a lot about it in the news right now too. I'm hopeful that we still will be able to come up with a bipartisan infrastructure deal. Obviously, it's taking some time to work through that, but those conversations are happening. I know on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, our ranking member and the chair of that committee are working together and trying to come up with solutions. Republicans have offered a less expensive bill that focuses more on what I think Iowans would consider to be a traditional infrastructure package, which, when I look at the definition of what I think that is, it's roads and bridges, it's your lock and dam systems, which is absolutely crucial to Iowa. I had the chance to go visit Lock and Dam 11 just a few weeks ago in Dubuque and hear about what they need to do to modernize. If anybody's been following the news nationally, obviously with or international, I guess I would say, the Suez Canal challenge that was faced with the barge that got stuck, even recently with the bridge, the barge traffic that backed up.
Those locks are getting close to 90 years old.
Right, so we absolutely need to do that. That's something that is crucial, and I'm actually working on that. We have submitted a request for funding for Lock and Dam 25. Obviously, it's a big river, and a lot of those to repair, but we need to upgrade those. They need to be bigger so that barge traffic can move through more efficiently. And then, so roads and bridges, obviously the lock and dams, and then I think broadband also fits in that. Obviously at the state level, I'd like to thank our state legislators for the work they did on that this year. There is a federal level implication here too. I think that is part of an infrastructure package. But what I don't like seeing in that package is more subsidies for electric vehicles than for roads and bridges and locks and dams combined. I think that sends the wrong message. And also only about a quarter of that nearly $2 trillion package is actually infrastructure spending in the traditional sense. So my goal is to make sure we're refocused on those priorities. Iowans need safe roads and bridges. Our farmers and our manufacturers need to be able to get their products to market down the lock and dam system. I met with the Iowa corn growers a few months ago, I think, and they flagged for me that it's cheaper for us to actually send our corn down the Mississippi and over to China, a country that needs to buy a lot of our corn, than it is for them to grow their own right now. So we need to make sure we can do that as efficiently as possible so our producers can truly reap the benefits of what they're doing to help feed the world. So we'll continue to stand up for taxpayers in this process. We'll continue to stand up for judicious spending on an infrastructure package. I do think we need to make an investment there, but I don't want to see what I like to call more fluff and free stuff built into these bills. Thanks, Bill.
I wanted to thank you for voting no against the PRO Act. I recently started a contract with a local newspaper to write a guest or a column twice a month. And I wrote about how the PRO Act would absolutely ruin my livelihood as an independent contractor. In doing so, I've started being followed on Twitter by people all over the country, and I'm realizing that the PRO Act, it would take away our rights to be an independent contractor. It would force us to become an employee of whatever organization we are contracting with. And that's something that affects everybody regardless of their political position. I'm getting in contact with people whose politics are the opposite of mine, and yet we are united in the fact that it would absolutely ruin our livelihoods. So I want to thank you for voting against the actual bill. My understanding is that they are trying to work a lot of the language into from that bill into the infrastructure package or any other mind assuring me that you will also vote against anything that includes language of the PRO Act, regardless of how it is included?
Thank you for that question, Althea, and I agree with you. I think that act was destructive to our business community. It is destructive to independent contractors. It's designed to support the union bosses, not the union workers. I think it sends the wrong message for Iowa, and so I am proud to vote against provisions of the PRO Act. I'm proud to have voted against the PRO Act. I don't think it was the right solution. I also think it just sends also a message that we want to grow government, which I don't think is the direction we should be taking. And I agree. I mean, I think it's interesting you look at these packages and what's being included in them, language that will forever change the way construction is done in states like Iowa, where we've been very efficient and we've been able to provide good return on investment for our taxpayers. I've heard a lot of stories from people who are upset about not being able to have their livelihood play out as they want it to. Truck drivers who want to be able to stand up and say, this is the route I want to drive, this is the hours I want to work, and I'm going to work as an independent contractor, not an employee of a trucking company. I think having that freedom is what this country is built on, freedom of being able to decide what your life looks like for you. So I'll continue to support that every chance I get, but I appreciate it. Thanks, Althea. And then,
Recently, Marjorie Taylor Greene compared the coronavirus preventative measure to the Yellow Star data that led to the murder of Jews. Do you agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene in regards to mask mandate in comparison to the Holocaust?
I absolutely think those comments are ridiculous. I put up a statement over the weekend basically shunning any of that anti-Semitic rhetoric. We've seen an increase in that recently, which is unacceptable to me, and frankly, that comparison is a complete injustice to the people who actually experienced the Holocaust, and I think it's unacceptable. Those comments have no place in the halls of Congress, and that's on both sides of the aisle. I think if there's anything we've seen inflammatory rhetoric toward the Jewish and the Israeli community, that's amped up a lot in the past several weeks, which I believe is unfortunate. I'm hopeful we'll be able to continue to have a good alliance with Israel and continue to support them as an ally in the region. But again, that language is entirely unacceptable to me, and I'm not afraid to call it out. I said that a few months ago with her when I had a conversation with her, and I told her I was not going to give her a pass. So I'm not giving her a pass, and I will continue to hold that same standard for anyone who's using inflammatory rhetoric in the halls of Congress. Good morning.
Good morning. From Aiden Woods. Since the More Perfect Union legislation was passed last year, what are you doing at the federal level to help the social justice movement?
Excuse me, sorry, could you say that? What legislation?
Since the More Perfect Union legislation was passed last year, what are you doing on the federal level to help the social justice movement?
Well, thank you for the question, and I do believe it's important that we move toward more equality, more transparency on those issues. That's why I supported the bill last summer that we worked on here in Iowa. I think Iowa was a great leader in making those important steps forward in the social justice movement. One thing I think is important is we are seeing bipartisan talks already happen on a package. Senator Scott and I think Senator Booker are working on it right now in the Senate. I'm interested to see what they come up with. I'm right now, just so you're aware of what our office is doing, we're actually engaging, we're having roundtables, we're having meetings with constituent groups on both sides of this issue so that we can be best informed when we try to make sure that we're making a policy that works and it's going to actually accomplish the goals of what we want. I'm 100% in support of our law enforcement, but I'm also 100% against police brutality. We need to be able to hold bad actors accountable. If there's one thing that I've heard from the sheriffs and the law enforcement that I've talked to, it's that they also don't want the bad actors because it gives them a bad name. And I think that's incredibly important. We have a lot of police officers out there every day who are putting their lives on the line to keep our community safe, but bad actors should absolutely be held accountable. So in whatever we move forward with, know that that's my ultimate goal, is to make sure we're keeping our communities safe, but also standing up for those values of we won't tolerate racism and we won't tolerate bad cops. We just won't. So appreciate that question, and we'll keep working on it. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Summer. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's your name and where are you from?
Oh,
sir?
my name is Peggy. I'm from Marion, Iowa. 75% of nearly 25,000 protect healthcare and social care workers from workplace violence. Yet, you voted against it. Can you explain why you voted against this bill?
HR 1195. I think you're referring to the VAWA. Which one is it?
The bill I'm referring to is protecting healthcare workers from workplace violence, which you voted against it.
There were some provisions in there that I believe would have been actually unconstitutional, which is why I voted against it. And I'm all about protecting healthcare workers. Nobody should feel unsafe where they go to work. I think when you look at some of these bill packages, they include provisions that would be an assault on the Constitution. We've seen that time and time again coming out of this Congress. Bills have been brought to the floor without full consideration in committee. Another reason why I voted against a lot of pieces of legislation. Everybody should know one of the most important things that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in Congress did was change the rules so they could bring bills to the floor without consideration through committee. That means that as your representative, I did not get a chance to make changes or have a voice in making amendments to bills. I would have liked to get to a yes on that. There are lots of bills that I would love to get to a yes on. But unfortunately, what we've seen is a shutoff in negotiating with us as a minority party. We didn't get to have our voice on that. And so unfortunately, we saw that happen up until April 1st. Any bill that had passed through the last Congress, they made the decision that they could just bring it to the floor without any input. So that's my perspective on...
With respect, Representative Hinson, this bill would have bipartisan support, and I would like to know specifically what provisions in this bill you were against. Since, like I said, 47% of emergency room physicians have been assaulted on the job. This bill will provide protections.
Yeah, and we're working on additional ways to find protections. Again, that bill didn't have a chance to go through committee, and I'm happy to follow up with you on a more granular level as to all the provisions in that bill that I didn't support. But what I would say is that I do care about making sure people feel safe in their workplace. I talked about the VA accountability bill. That was based on data, that was based on real feedback from the Government Accountability Office. You know, when we're hearing that people feel unsafe at work, we're taking action on that. And that bill was crafted in a bipartisan way, unlike the one that you're talking about. So I'm happy to come to the table. I think it's really important, and we are working on that. In different aspects, we're tackling it a lot of different ways in different departments. So next question. Back in the back with the orange shirt, right there.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I go to school here, and I was wondering, how do you plan to take action against sexual assault in the military?
Well, thank you, Rebecca, and that's a great question. I've worked a lot with U.S. Senator Ernst, who is herself a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault. That's one thing that I think she's made very clear is a joint shared priority between us. That's why we're taking steps like the bill I was just talking about. We don't think anybody should be sexually harassed in their workplace or assaulted in their workplace. People can't provide the best care to our veterans. People can't do their jobs if they're feeling unsafe in their workplace. So that's one thing that we continue to work on. So any of those policies that come up, as we continue to have those conversations, happy to keep driving awareness about it. One of the policies that I worked on here at a state level was Marcy's Law, which stood up for victims. I mean, I think we need to make sure victims have a good voice. It would have actually put into our state constitution language that meant victims actually have a voice and have rights in that process as well. So continuing to stand up for victims and trying to stand up for safe workplaces as well is a priority. Thank you for your question. Right there. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Doug Lane. I'm from Robbins. And in your opening remarks, you mentioned talking about politics and issues that matter at the kitchen table, and you mentioned keeping the political discourse polite and friendly. But I want to read back a couple of things that have come from your email list. So on March 6th, you said that the Democrats will do everything except help out struggling Americans. Their latest ridiculous stunt is an attempt to cancel classic children's author Dr. Seuss. That is a lie, because the Dr. Seuss estate simply reviewed their books and decided some of them had racial stereotypes in them and decided not to print them anymore. They're not gone, they just chose not to print them. On March 30th, you said that if you want Pelosi, Schumer, and President Biden to give up their liberal nonsense, we must meet this quarterly goal. First, they suggested we consume 100% synthetic beef. effectively bankrupting our livestock industry. That is a lie. Bill Gates said that in an interview with MIT. None of those three Democrats you mentioned have actually said that. My problem is that you are throwing sand in the gears of the very kitchen table discussions that you seem to hold dear. When I talk to my neighbors, my friends, my family, and we hold opposing political viewpoints, you have already poisoned the well with things like this. You're not helping.
Doug, I appreciate that feedback, and what I would say is that, and I appreciate the question. What I think is really important, and I made it very clear when I came up to this stage today, I'm not afraid to work in a bipartisan way on things that are important to this district. I know climate is very important to you because I know I've corresponded with you when I represented you in the State House as well, and your wife too. Those are issues that I believe Iowans have answers to, and we can do it in a bipartisan way. And I'm coming to the table on that. That's why I introduced things like the PRECISE Act, which are bipartisan, and we are talking about those things too. But I can darn well assure you that if there are inflammatory comments coming from the left, I'm also going to call those out. When I look at some of the things that have been talked about there are some ridiculous ideas coming out of Bill Gates with and the leadership in Congress right now with Nancy Pelosi. We've seen $6 trillion in spending proposed coming out of this Congress, coming out of President Biden's administration. That's what I'm wanting to talk about, and that is they care about protecting their tax dollars. They care about, you care about in this room, protecting rural America. We have to stand up for those things, but still call out the things that are coming from the left that are absolutely ridiculous ideas, including. That doesn't change the fact that a lie is a lie. Well, I appreciate your comment. Thank you so much for coming today to the forum. And I will always stand up for rural America. I will always stand up for what's right for this district. I will always do it in a bipartisan way when possible, but when it's not possible, you can be darn sure I'm also going to call out people that are not proposing ideas that are right for this district. And then I want to get to somebody who hasn't yet. Yeah, we'll do one more here and then I'll go back there.
Hi, my name is Marco. I go to Metro. What do you think about the first 2 years of community college being free for the kids who can't afford it?
Well, thank you for that question. Thank you for driving up today. I believe education is really important. Our community colleges here in Iowa do it right. We have a great community college system. We have a great four-year degree system and a great school system here in Iowa as well. I'm a public school kid myself. What I think is important is having skin in the game. I don't agree with a blanket free college assessment. I don't think that provides that investment, the give and take that you need as a student to really feel engaged. But I'm also wanting to support more opportunities for people to get that degree if they choose to. That's why I have already visited with several of our community colleges, Marshalltown Community College, Kirkwood Community College, had a chance to go and talk with them about how we can provide additional opportunities to students. One of those being, I supported the Jobs Act, which would actually expand Pell Grant opportunities so that more people who have a need can actually get some grant dollars and some scholarships to go to school. So that's where I think we need to be focusing, is on continuing to find those opportunities, because education is the great equalizer. It provides that opportunity, and what we're seeing is the conversation shift a little bit away from maybe a four-year degree more to a two-year degree, or even just graduating from high school with skills you need to be able to go into the workforce as well. Interesting little side note, I had a couple of Zooms last week with the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Alliance, Grow Cedar Valley, which is the chamber of the Cedar Valley, and then also met with the Dubuque Chamber of Commerce. So three of the biggest organizations that represent businesses in the district. And one of the consistent pieces of feedback that we got on those Zooms was, we need more trained workers, we need more skilled labor, which our community colleges are doing a great job at training people up through those vocational and trade programs. We need those skilled laborers, and we just need people in the workforce, which is, I think, a huge challenge for our businesses right now. Everywhere you go, you see a help wanted sign, it seems, in the door. So yeah, I think there are plenty of ways to support education without making it a free, like a blank check. The government doesn't have a blank check. Sometimes it likes to act like it, which is what we've seen happen in the last couple of months. But I think it's really important to put a spotlight on ways where we can continue to support educational opportunities for Iowans. Thank you. Okay. Back there in the back.
My name is Deb Vaughn. I'm from Newhall, Iowa. And I know that we were all, probably including you, glued to television sets on January 6th when we were watching Glass Break at our Capitol building, when we were seeing a gallows erected in front of us. And I feel also that many in Congress who voted against the investigation would have voted for it had it been thought that it was perpetrated by BLM members or Antifa members. I'd like you to justify for me why you voted against having an investigation of January 6th.
Thank you, Doug, for the question, and thank you for coming this morning. I was in the Capitol on January 6th for that joint session of Congress. I had left the chamber and went back to my office and was sheltering in place in my office when all of that you described was happening outside. And it was horrible. It was a horrible day. It was a horrible day for our country. I had to, obviously my husband was texting me trying to make sure I was safe, but I had to have a very uncomfortable conversation with my kids that night about what happened at the Capitol that day. And I do feel that getting answers about what happened at the Capitol is important. And I think it's absolutely important that we hold people accountable who breached the Capitol, who caused damage, who hurt people. That's unacceptable to me. You mentioned some racism things that were constructed outside. That is completely unacceptable. We should be calling that out because again, that whole day sent the wrong message for our country, and I believe that. That's why I, along with only about 30 other members, sponsored a piece of legislation that would have created that commission back on January 12th, because I did think it was important. Nancy Pelosi chose not to bring that to the floor. She chose not to move forward with that. We kept asking and nothing happened. But you know what did happen in that time? The Department of Justice moved forward, the FBI moved forward, the Secret Service moved forward, Capitol Police moved forward, and Metro Police all moved forward. We, as members of Congress, had multiple opportunities to question them. Some of those were in closed-door sessions, high-security briefing sessions. So we are getting those answers. More than 400 people have been arrested so far, with at least another 100 in the pipeline that I'm aware of. So it is important, but at this point, there was no provision in what passed last week that would have required members of Congress to stay out of these ongoing investigations. We need to let the Department of Justice do their job. We need to let the Capitol Police do their job. They went through a horrible experience that day too, not to mention the animosity toward our law enforcement officers right now too. So I supported the commission back in January, on January 12th. It didn't move forward, but those investigations did, and that's why I decided not to support the commission last week. I think we need to let those investigations play out, and justice is being served. The Senate also has a bipartisan commission, committees that are working on this, and their report is expected in June. So in just a few weeks, we'll get answers from that as well. So that's where I stood on the commission and why I made that decision, but I do think we need to get answers and we need to get to the bottom of it. Thanks, Doug.
That's horrible.
Okay, I'm Tom Lustig from Vinton. First of all, I want to thank you very much for coming out. I mean, we've got different opinions here, which is great. But the fact that you're out seeing us out in the local community is great. And you're a great communicator. You represent Iowa on national TV and stuff, so we're getting some of our voices heard. But I want to talk a little bit about the main thing that I think is important, and that's accountability, and accountability in our government. And I think we've got a lot of students here that are going to be paying the bill down the road. I'm going to be gone, but I think the first thing we need to understand is the government has no money. It's taxpayers' money. And I don't think people realize that. Everybody in this room, one way or another, is going to be paying for these things. We need to work through what's really valid and what isn't. And what really upsets me as a taxpayer or as an individual who believes in accountability is when we have these massive bills that are 1,000 pages, 2,000 pages, 6,000 pages, and all these little things that are stuck in there. And it's just like you alluded to the one gal that asked the question about that one bill, why you voted against it. Most of us have no idea what's in those bills. And so we really depend on somebody like you to communicate to us what's good about them, what's bad about them. And to think that a 1,000-page or 10,000-page bill that we know the ramifications, we know right now that a lot of this money that's been going out is fraudulent. You know, the amount of money we send in there and the amount of money that actually goes for a good project, it's unbelievable how much fraudulent it is. So accountability. So as we look at these students out here that are going to be paying the bills down the road, what does a $30 trillion budget look like for our future generations? And how are we going to handle that in the future?
Well, Tom, thank you very much for that perspective, and I agree with you. I think government transparency is one of the reasons why I ran for this job in the first place. As a reporter, I care about holding people responsible. I think it's really important. That's why I'm also here answering questions, because I believe in that transparency. I think it is important to engage and hear stories, even if it's people you don't agree with. I think that goes missing, and we could probably use a little bit more of that in Washington, D.C. as well. But yeah, transparency is important to me. I do a weekly press call every Friday. I let the press ask me any questions they want, which, you know, sometimes the media isn't always your friend, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. But I do that because I believe that's really important. When you talk about accountability for government, Congress, in my mind, has three basic functions. We're supposed to authorize programs, and then fund those programs, and oversee those programs. Unfortunately, Congress has failed most of the time at least 2 out of 3 of those. But I know the value of a dollar. I'm teaching that to my children, Max and Jax. As a mom, I think it's important that they understand the value of a dollar. When we pay our taxes, my husband sends the check, he takes a picture of it and sends it to me, because obviously I'm his legislator, and his congressman, and says, honey, spend it wisely, and that's not lost on me in terms of, it is your money, it's not the government's money. So that's why I have opposed some of these large spending packages, because the spending spigot has clearly been turned on. I'm all for targeted relief, I'm all for targeted infrastructure spending, but when you're sending checks to prisoners in the American Rescue Plan, that's a problem. And when you're sending money to subways, which I spotlighted through an amendment that I was able to file on the floor, not through committee, but on the floor, when you're spending money, $160 million on a subway tunnel in what's supposed to be a rescue act for COVID, that's a problem. When you're not having any accountability for hundreds of billions of dollars in funds that have gone out to schools to reopen across this country, like we've done here in Iowa safely, that's a problem. So I also introduced the Reopen Schools Act, which would have put some actual accountability on those billions of dollars going out across the country. My bill, which we brought to the floor 4 times, and it was voted down every single time, would have actually required schools across the country to have a plan to reopen. They'd get 1/3 of the money right away, but then the second 2/3 would be contingent upon coming up with a plan, submitting it to your governor, and moving forward. Kids need to be back in the classroom. You talk about transparency on an issue. We have a mental health crisis going on related to our kids in what we've seen in the last year. Emergency room visits are up for not only our teenagers, but for our youngest students. When I look across the country and I see half of students in this country not back in a classroom, that's a problem. So I believe in government transparency. I believe in holding people accountable. And I think I've shown that in my time in office, but I appreciate your concerns, and I share those concerns as well, Tom. Thank you. If you haven't asked yet. I'm going to get everybody who hasn't asked a question yet first. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Bethany Gates. I live right here in Vinton. I'm a certified professional midwife. So I'm wanting to just say thank you for co-sponsoring the Midwives for Moms Act and the Babies Act. So my concern is that the federal government is doing things that Iowa isn't even willing to do. So I know that here we have today Senator Driscoll and Representative Gerhold, and they are great midwife supporters, and I'm so thankful to have them representing our area. But Iowa right now has a lack of legislation and some very poor legislation that is not increasing midwifery in Iowa. So we know that midwives are so important for increasing maternal health care outcomes. The United States is one of the worst of the developed nations for maternal mortality and neonatal mortality, and that should not be the case. But Iowa has a certificate of need law, which is prohibiting the opening of freestanding birth centers. So midwives cannot open these because the hospitals have the right with this law to say, no, we don't need you. And then Iowa is also declining to recognize certified professional midwives, which is listed in the Midwives for Moms Act. So how do we address that in Iowa? You're doing a wonderful job on the federal level, but our state needs to follow suit. So So what does that look like? What influence can you have in your position to change things here in Iowa?
Well, thank you, Bethany, for your service in delivering all those healthy babies and making sure our moms are healthy too. I appreciate all that you do. That's a priority for me, obviously, as a mom myself, been through 2 deliveries, understand I had great access to medical care. I was able to drive right down the road and go see my OB. Access to maternal fetal health care should not be dependent on your zip code, and that's an absolute priority for me. When I talk about standing up for rural America, access to health care in rural America is absolutely critical. I think we've seen a spotlight on that with what we've been through in the last year. But yeah, making sure we have that access is super important. So the Midwives for Moms Act basically provides additional grants to be able to incentivize midwives to come practice in rural areas where there might be a maternal health care desert. There are 6 counties in the 1st District alone that are considered maternal fetal health care deserts. We have 6 that I think are considered full service, and then the rest are somewhere in the middle there. But again, I think it's an absolute priority. We need to be incentivizing more options for healthcare, and I think that's really important. And then the Babies Act, it actually incentivizes building those birthing centers independently. We've seen an alarming number of specialists leave rural America. When you look at what it costs to be an OB, it's a huge expense between the malpractice insurance and obviously in rural America, it's a huge challenge to recruit specialists of any kind to come practice. So I think we need to be solving those problems in a bipartisan way, and that's exactly what those bills do. I worked with Lucille Royal-Allard, who actually I serve with her on the Appropriations Committee as well, but she's from California, I'm from Iowa. It's an issue all across the country. So I think as far as what you can do here in Iowa, continue to build those coalitions and speak up. Your voice is powerful. Obviously, I can be a good, I think, advocate for this issue at the federal level. And I think you have some ears in the room who are hearing this conversation right now too. That's how you started. And I know a few years ago when I was serving in the Iowa House, there was a big discussion about certificate of need and how we could move forward with more independent operators. I think specifically a good example in Cedar Rapids, we had an eye doctor who wanted to be able to practice not in the hospital, and he was able to be successful. It took a number of attempts to get there, but yeah, keep having those conversations. I think it's really important to have women who are experiencing your services to speak up and tell their stories as well, because that's how you're going to get the change here at the state level. So happy to be a good voice for healthy moms and healthy babies at the federal level. Thank you, Bethany. Okay, green shirt right back there.
Hello, my name is Habib Seba. Habib Seba. And my question for you is, why are you against the investigation on the insurrection on January 6th?
I just answered that question a few minutes ago. I'm not against investigating. I supported the commission, obviously, on January 12th, but those investigations have already taken off and hundreds of arrests are happening. Our committees are asking questions, and I think that's the direction we need to go since it was not enacted back in January. But thank you. Go ahead over here.
Hi, I'm Cindy Norton from Anamosa. I guess I would like to give you the opportunity to address the man who said that you lied about Dr. Seuss and the false fake meat or whatever. Because that leads me to my next question of, do you condone the big lie that President Biden won the election and you voted Liz Cheney out of leadership? She told the truth. I think the truth should be a good thing, not a bad thing. The former guy, he lied a lot. He's lying about. He did not win that election. Joe Biden is our president, and he won the election.
I did not vote to challenge the election, and I think that's important to know.
Every single person who was in charge of the elections said it was run well. But you voted Liz Cheney out for what? She's telling the truth.
Happy to answer that question. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your perspective, and thank you so much for coming out today. I think, you know, obviously we had a lot of conversation about January 6th, and I did not vote to challenge the election because I believe states certify elections, not Congress. When our founding fathers set up the process of elections and how they were certified for presidential elections, they set it up that way on purpose because they knew members of Congress would try to grab more power. And what I don't want to see is, no matter who's in control of Congress, that they want to overturn the will of voters, no matter where they are in this country. That is important to me, and that's exactly why you saw me handle January 6th the way I did. What I think is also important, though, is that states have the right to run their own elections. Here in Iowa, I think we did it right. That doesn't mean you don't need to make changes to your election law. I believe voter ID is important. I think your vote matters, and you should be able to prove you are who you say you are. I think that's just fundamentally, as an American, truly important. You talk about election integrity. I think that's absolutely crucial. So I want to make sure we spotlight fraud when it is real and when it does happen, but I also want to make sure we respect those who have administered good elections in our states and continue to respect their authority. We saw that here in Iowa. We saw that play out with Congresswoman Miller-Meek's seat, right? She won by 6 votes. Not a huge margin. We call her Landslide, that's her nickname. But, you know, when it came down to that process, you know, there was remedy in the court system here in Iowa. It played out. And we saw that process play out in the right way. States certify elections, the federal government does not.
What do you say to the 70% of Republicans that don't believe Joe Biden won?
What I say is that I believe election integrity matters. I think that's absolutely important. And we should be asking questions. We should always be asking questions no matter which election it is. But I'm not going to perpetuate conspiracy theories. I don't believe in those either. I'm a fact-based person. I think it's important. So what I would say is that I believe in election integrity. States sometimes get it wrong. Sometimes we see states get it wrong, and they need to make changes if it went wrong last year. But I think it's absolutely important that some states, yes, but some states actually, they've actually had commissions. They have actually had commissions that have been moving forward, and in a bipartisan way in Pennsylvania. So, but I appreciate your perspective, and I appreciated Liz Cheney's conservative record. I think she has a very conservative record, and I support a lot of what she has supported. I gave her a chance 6 weeks ago. The conference chair's job is to be the chief messenger for your conference. It's to be out there providing those opportunities to us as members to get out there and tell the story. So Liz Cheney was not following the will of our conference, and that's why I supported a change. And I say it's something very simple. If you had a chief marketing officer for your company, and you hired them to do a job, and they were out there selling for your competition, you'd make a change, and that's exactly what we did. I think there is a variety of viewpoints in our conference, and that's okay. There's a variety of viewpoints in this room, clearly, too. But I think it's important that role specifically, she told me she was going to meet those requirements, and she didn't, so that's why I supported the change. My main goal right now is spotlighting the problems that I believe are coming out of this administration, that I believe are coming out of Congress, that are bad for this district, and that's what I want to talk about. And the media certainly wasn't willing to move on, so I'm willing to move on, and that's what I've done by supporting a change in leadership.
My name's Bill Keller, and I'm from Vinton. Thank you for what you do. To watch a soul willingly step into a snake pit is awesome. You're an awesome woman. Thank you for doing what you do. I guess my concern revolves around 3 bills that are out there floating around. One is H.R. 1, one is H.R. 5, and one is H.R. 127. Okay, H.R. 1 is just, Ben Franklin said at the end of all the work that they did, nice republic if you can keep it. We're on the edge of losing our republic. I'm exhausted by Congress people who say we live in a democracy. We do not. We haven't lived in a democracy since the founding, okay? We live in a constitutional republic, which means that each state has a responsibility to do the best they can do for their constituents and their constituents alone. That meshes together into a republic, which becomes our country. H.R. 1 would gut that. It moves full responsibility for elections to the federal level. That would be horribly wrong and would destroy us as a nation. The second is H.R. 5, which is an introduction to the concept of hate speech. We can see how that works. We don't live in a bubble. It's called the internet. If you want to see how this stuff works, you can look in other countries. If you look at how hate speech works in Britain, if I say I think Islam is a religion that leans towards violence, in Britain I go to jail. In France I go to jail because I can't say those words. Our republic is based on an old fart like me being able to get up to a mic and talk to you to say, I've got a problem with this and I'm concerned. The last is 127, and that guts the Second Amendment. And I mean guts it in a way where they can walk into your house and confiscate your firearms. Those three bills will destroy this country as we know it. We talked about the kids that live behind us. I grew up in the 60s. I was in Detroit on July 21st, 1967, when America came apart, okay? That's the beginning of the riots. Our church buses came home, there were holes in the buses because people were shooting at us. That's when Watts and Boston and Newark and Milwaukee and Philadelphia and Atlanta saw violence like we've not even begun to see. We're on the edge of that. Honest to God, we are. And I guess on my charge, I'm making a statement. I'm not asking a question. I'm just begging you to go back and talk to the Republicans and the Democrats to say, is that what you want? Because it feels like, I feel kind of like the person sitting in my kitchen table in April of 1861, watching Fort Sumter, saying, holy crap, is this where we are? It makes me nervous.
Well, and I think, Bill, this goes back to what I was just answering about the way Congress was set up. We have to have some protections in there to prohibit these power grabs from happening. That's why I will always stand up for states' rights, because I think that's crucially important. Bill, we've seen an assault on our Constitution in the last 5 months. With a number of the policies that have passed, I believe have been unconstitutional. We've seen that assault go after your First Amendment rights. You talk about free speech, censorship. You talk about the freedom of religion to practice how you feel the religion that's important to you. We've seen those assaults happen. Some of them may be more nuanced, but the implications are very real. We've seen the assault on the Second Amendment. And again, we've seen the assault on the 10th Amendment. I alluded to the states' rights. That's why I think we should have states' ability to pursue election law, not a massive federal takeover of elections. I call that the For the Politicians Act because it actually siphons away money that would belong to the taxpayers going to the Treasury and forces a campaign match of, I think it's 6-to-1. So if you gave a politician $25, you get a 6-to-1, they would get a 6-to-1 match. That could mean you support a candidate and then tax dollars from someone else who doesn't support that candidate are going to that candidate. I think that's flat out wrong. It overrides the ability of states to run their own elections, and it eliminates common sense provisions like voter ID, which I think are, as I talked about how important they are, I think, to the integrity of our elections. So I did not support that policy. I'm happy to support good common sense policy that will help make sure our election integrity is paramount and first and foremost on everybody's mind, but I'm not going to support policies that I think put our country at risk or tear apart the Constitution. We have one more question. Time for one more. Anyone not asked a question that wants to ask one? That's what I would say first. Anyone? Oh, right here in the front.
Good morning, Ashley.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. My name's Bonnie, and I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm going to touch on infrastructure again. I would like to know if you do oppose the infrastructure program, and also what is it you are doing to eliminate the wasteful spending that's in that package. To me, that's, like you touched on here this morning, the spending that is going to be paid for by me, I'm retired,
by my kids, yep.
by my kids, and by my great-grandkids. I don't want to see them do that. I mean, it was fearful for me hearing this growing up and raising my kids about how government was spending And now, we're talking about trillions of dollars, and quite frankly, I haven't a clue what $1 trillion looks like.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think sometimes the government feels like it's working with monopoly money, right? You just add a couple more zeros on the end, right? And that is concerning to me. As I mentioned, over $6 trillion in proposed spending just in this first 5 months that I've been in office. That is alarming, to say the very least, and it's why I talked about a provision of the rescue plan that I was opposed to, bailouts to states that can't manage their own budgets to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. What you've now seen is states like California, which got hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars inflowing into their state. They have been in budget mismanagement chaos for decades. And you know what? Now they're getting checks because their governor has decided to send out checks. So that's Iowa taxpayer money, your money, flowing into a state like California that can't manage its budget like we do here in Iowa. That's appalling to me, and it's absolutely an abuse that I will stand up against, continue to spotlight those opportunities. I think another one I would point to, and I mentioned it earlier, but talking about trying to put a subway tunnel funding. I support infrastructure, but not in a rescue bill. That's designed for COVID relief. It was not really COVID relief. It was 9% going to public health measures to fight the pandemic, so we can all be here in an auditorium not wearing our masks if we choose. But also, that money was designed to get shots in arms and get our country back to normal again, which is what I think we all want. We want our economic recovery to take off. We want to, again, stand up for freedom and opportunity and safety and security in our country. So I will continue to spotlight those wasteful spending opportunities. Washington has a pork problem, but we love our Iowa pork. And so on that note, I will wrap up, but thank you so much for coming out today. I appreciate your questions. I know we may disagree on some things, but it is truly an honor to represent you in this district. We're working hard every day to stand up for taxpayers, to fight for rural America, and make sure we're spotlighting those freedom and opportunities for you in fighting for our Constitution every day. Just in follow-up, a little housekeeping. If you do have any questions or concerns with the federal government, our staff is here. Again, we have those forms you can fill out. I'd like to thank the government classes that came up today. Can you guys, or the high school classes, can you guys all stand really quick? I just want to say, this is your next generation right here. So thank you for engaging. Thank you all for asking questions. I appreciate it as well. So these are our next generation, our young people, and that's what I'm fighting for every day in Congress. So thank you very much for coming. It's an honor to serve you. Our website has all of our contact information on it, HinsonTownHall5.gov. We also have a newsletter that goes out every Friday. I'd encourage you to sign up, Thursday or Friday, depending on the week. I'd encourage you to sign up for that as well. We put a lot of good information, context as well for a lot of the issues that we're working on, what's good and what's not so good. So thank you again for coming. It's a pleasure to serve you. Bye-bye.